This is the presentation that was given to Cornwall Council Waste Development Advisory Panel on the 11th of July 2012 by the Cornwall Waste Forum, St Dennis branch. I would like to start with a story. Once upon a time there was a council in a green and pleasant part of our land which was worried about its waste treatment costs. So they decided to go for a PFI contract with incineration as the central focus of that. However, the local peasants were revolting and, with their lawyers, fought a long battle against this approach. After 10 years, the council said there must be a better way. So they looked around and realised the local waste facts had changed. So with help from PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the biggest audit companies on the planet, they decided on world-class waste solutions, which involves high recycling levels and anaerobic digestion and other decentralised treatment options. They found this would save them £200 million over 10 years. The name of the council was Surrey County Council. And the moral of this story is, when the facts change, one is wise to closely examine one's opinion for the need to change. So locally in Cornwall, changes of fact include waste arisings have been dropping for years. So they started dropping before the recession, so it cannot be blamed entirely on the recession. And also it's against a local situation where the population is increasing. Other facts which have changed are the technology. There's a wider range of bankable technology now available, which wasn't available some years ago, a decade or more, but it is now. Finance has changed as well. Local government has to reduce its spending, and this is one way to do it. More options also available for investing to save. Government policy has changed. There are higher recycling targets, and there are even higher ones coming from Europe. And there are policies now which the government is beginning to implement or work towards on a circular economy, and that particularly applies to waste and recycling. Also, there are more flexible planning policies in place. And public opinion has changed. So this paper has been prepared with the following strategic aim as its guiding principle: minimising costs to the council taxpayer and the national exchequer. So we aim to do this through the following objectives. Minimising waste production. That is the biggest single thing you can do to cut the cost of waste, is not have it in the first place. Maximising recycling. Localising waste treatment cuts transport cost. And minimising site sizes to minimise local impacts, which obviously makes it easier to get planning. Other objectives include maximising use of waste as materials, minimising greenhouse gas emissions, which we take on global responsibilities and our place in the world is important, and looking after our local soils by maximising the return of organic matter to them, minimising transport costs and helping local industry where we can with relevant activities. So the basic principle, aside from minimising costs, is maximise the use of materials as materials locally. So the proposed system, which we are suggesting to the council, is first of all a large waste awareness programme. That way you cut the amount of waste produced in the first place. And government reports suggest that over a period of time you can reduce the waste arisings by 15%. Also, separate food waste collection. Half the local authorities in the country now have separate food waste collection programmes. And it does an amazing amount to reduce the amount of food waste arising in the first place, as well as making it easier to sort what's left. Then we have the suggestion for 3 locations strategically around Cornwall with high-tech sorting plant for the black bag waste that's left. Also 2 locations with anaerobic digestion for the separate food waste, and 1 location with fibre AD for what comes out of the residuals when you've sorted the materials for recycling. You get a certain amount of organics left, which can go to AD. Then the rest of the system to remain unchanged. To make it easy to understand the difference between what we're proposing and the present proposal of the incinerator, we've got 2 flowcharts. So starting with the proposed incinerator flowchart, you can see that the residual MSW of around that 180,000 tonnes along with some commercial and industrial waste, goes into the incinerator, producing a large amount of CO2, a certain amount of toxic outflowings, heavy metals, toxins, PCBs, PM10s, etc., along with the waste of 55,000 tonnes of bottom ash, which may or may not be used as aggregate, and a certain amount of it, in any case, has to go to landfill. And toxic fly ash to Gloucestershire, which is over 200 miles away, or potentially as far as the salt mines for storage. Now, if you compare that to the recycling option flowchart, you can see it's a lot more complex because there's a lot more different activities going on. In the first place, we're cutting down the amount of waste through the waste awareness campaign and programs, and separate food waste, which again leads to reduction of the amount of food waste produced. The clean food waste, separately collected, goes straight to anaerobic digestion plant, which produces a quality compost, a certain amount of CO2 emissions and electricity, along with a small amount of rejects. Then the bulk of the residuals then goes into the high-tech sorting plant, and the suggestion is 3 different locations for that, so it only goes locally and gets sorted according to the market conditions of the time, because the sorting plant is extremely high-tech and able to be changed according to what's needed in terms of how much it sorts. So we get a high proportion of the materials going to market as clean materials of the type required. Then the remaining fibres, so that is the remaining organic materials such as contaminated paper and card, a small amount of food waste and so on, goes into a fibre anaerobic digestion plant, producing some CO2 emissions, electricity again, and a lower quality compost than the clean food waste. And that's why you keep the 2 streams separate. So from this, there are no toxic waste and relatively small amount of landfill, and high levels of materials going to the recycling market. Now we can see a plastic sorting machine in operation to see the kind of equipment we're talking about. You can see the operator is got clean hands and operating the machinery with buttons rather than dirty hands. This section shows the actual separation of different materials and has been significantly slowed down compared to the actual reality. Now you may say it's very hard to get planning permission for any waste equipment of any sort or treatment facilities, but the local planning policies, now we have the Waste Local Plan, although it's somewhat old now, the SAVE policies which are relevant are policy L2 and L5, which both provide for planning permissions for applications for materials recycling facilities, in other words the kind of equipment we're talking about, on suitable industrial land, previously used land, or on or adjacent to existing waste management facilities, and similarly for composting sites. Now it's important to recognise that these are the real planning policies at the moment, and the new National Planning Policy Framework does not disabuse us of that approach. So when we're looking for sites in which we could carry out the kinds of activities we're talking about, our site assessment search used those parameters as the starting point. Then obviously in addition we needed willing landowner or land owned by the council, sites of 2 to 3 hectares, which is quite small in industrial terms, strategic locations to minimise transport costs throughout Cornwall, close to population centres again to minimise transport costs, and close to our main spine, the A30, preferably also with a local heat load. So this map shows us our indicative 8 sites, which would be the first level of success on site searching. And you can see that they are up and down the A30, plus other places where there is waste activity already underway. The first 3 sites, which we think would be the primary sites, are strategically located to cover the whole of Cornwall without carrying too much in terms of lorry miles. which is obviously important given the A30 gets quite congested at times. So Hull and Beagle, near Scoria, Victoria, near Roach, and Pennygilham Industrial Estate at Launceston. So if we look at Hull and Beagle, then we have a site which you can see the bottom picture shows potential layout with our proposed area in the bottom right hand corner, where there is existing development framework from 2011 for waste facilities. There is already planning permission by Corey for a large commercial industrial waste sorting plant, and planning application has just gone in on the same site, the orange area, for a relatively small gasifier plant which will use, again, commercial industrial waste. So this plant fits in with existing activities or permitted activities on the site, fits in with the master plan, and also the vehicle numbers we're talking about fit in with the master plan vehicle limits. The second example primary site is Victoria at Roach, which is just off the A30. Central location for Cornwall, with room for a sorting and an anaerobic digester plant, and the area, the proposed site, already has planning for B1, B2 and B8 industrial uses, which is the same as Hull and Beagle started out, and which is then go on to specialise in waste matters. The highways issues, which were the case some years ago, have now been resolved with a new A30 alignment. So again, that seems like an appropriate kind of site, and we have a willing landowner. The third site, Pennygilham, is owned by the council and is already in use for a household waste recycling centre and a waste transfer station. So if the waste transfer station was not used, but the same materials coming in were then sorted and some went into anaerobic digestion, there'd be no extra vehicle movements, and it's on an existing council-owned waste site. So again, that fits the planning policies. Right, so we've looked at potential sites which all seem to fit the parameters needed. Now the important issue, of course, is this is about how to save money, is the development and the capital and operating costs of what we're proposing. Now obviously, to meet the requirements of the council, we have a long list of requirements for the plant and for the suppliers. So the plant's got to be deliverable, reliable, robust, economic, etc., already operated elsewhere at small scale. So these are all the kinds of parameters which were run by the council when they did the PFI contract. And similarly, for the suppliers, they must be bankable, they must be able to provide performance guarantees, have operating relevant projects, and so on. And one of our key issues is quality training for local operatives. So as part of developing the capital and operating costs, it's important that we use numbers which are robust and reliable, and that we minimise areas of disagreement with the council. So we've used the Cornwall Council Waste Arisings to 2031 report as our starting point. For the development of the Waste Awareness Programme, we've used the figures from RAP, which is a government agency, as to how much it's possible by waste awareness programmes to reduce waste arisings, which is, they reckon, 15% over a number of years. Segregated food waste collection obviously has to be worked out. Now we haven't been able to find out what it's thought it might cost in Cornwall, but we've used figures from other areas and talked with people who have run such programs of separated food waste collection, and we've worked out the cost of the amount of rollout that you can get and the capture rate from government reports and by discussions with people in the industry. Now the key point about waste arisings is you don't actually know how much is going to come. We can see trends over time, but you can't be absolutely sure what will happen in the future. So to be responsible, we recognise we need flexible facilities which allow for potentially higher arisings than we expect, and that's what we've chosen to do here. So we worked out sizings and flexibility. We then went to a range of potential suppliers who met the parameters from the previous slides, discussed issues with them. Once they realised that we were real serious, knew what we were doing, they were willing to give us data about their capital and operating costs. And then we checked that with public data from real projects, wherever possible. Then also, of course, we had building, civils and grid connection costs to work out, which we did in conjunction with local developers, and also project management costs, which were put on the top, a necessary part of costings. This slide shows you where we've got to over an investment programme over just a short number of years. First of all, start with Waste Awareness Programme. 300,000 a year, which continues throughout the whole time. It's very important to keep on the ball with encouraging people not to produce waste in the first place. Then 2013 also has start your contract work, start your planning, land agreements and so on. 2014, install the first sorting plant. They do not take very long to install. We've got a range there of 40 to 70,000 tonnes a year, and that is down to the number of shifts that you operate the plant for. If you have a plant of 20 tonnes an hour, a single shift, that is 2,000 hours a year roughly, gives you 40,000 tonnes a year. So you can see a double shift will give you 80,000 tonnes a year from the same plant with no extra capital cost. Obviously you have increased operating costs, but not extra capital. Then in the same year, 2014, install the first food waste AD plant, 25,000 tonnes. The next year, the second and third sorting plant and the residual fibre AD. And then 2016, as you need it, maybe later if it doesn't ramp up quickly enough from food waste, install the second food waste AD plant. Now that gives you a total cost of around about 60 million, which includes your planning and other risk costs, plus obviously the ongoing waste awareness programme. So that you can see the kinds of technology in its building, in its setting that we're talking about, here's an example, dry AD plant for residual organics from Vancy. You can see a fairly standard industrial building, and to the side of it there's windrows of compost maturing. The point about you potentially using Vancy here is that they are obviously a bankable supplier because the CETA is proposing to use them for the proposed incinerator. So when we get to comparing what we're talking about in terms of the proposed incinerator and high recycling options, you can see here the plant cost for each of the two. We think the incinerator potentially is about 156 million. That's including land, access and grid connection. And high recycling, as you've seen, is 60 million or thereabouts. Then on our side, to be fair to the incinerator, we have to include the cost of the contract termination, of the PFI contract termination, which is 30 to 50 million pounds, making a total of 156 million or thereabouts, versus 90 to 110 million, depending on how much goes back to CETA. And the main issue here has been we've not been able to find out the cost proposed for the incinerator. So we've used public information from Fitchner, who've recently worked for the council, for Naranjan Patel, who worked for the council and went off to DEFRA, and from other PFI original business case information which is available on the net. The cost of the PFI termination is obviously from the council work, which they reported on work they did with PwC on that. So here's an example plant again, showing what a different kind of biogas plant, AD plant, looks like. Again, municipal solid waste sorting in the big building, and the materials, the organic residuals, coming to the wet AD plant there. So when we're looking at capital and operating costs, obviously one has to say where the money is going to come from. So for the recycling option, we've potentially got at least three ways of financing it. Prudential borrowing. The council's got £240 million at present under prudential borrowing at various interest rates for various times up to 2056, so some of it's quite long term. Then it's possible to lease equipment, and we've spoken to the people that run the leasing scheme, Equip, which is government backed and offers around about 20% residual value guarantee. So that's backed by the government and obviously is fairly secure. That and then enables a very large range of banks to offer the monies for under lease for 5 to 10 years, which can then be refinanced. And because they have said to us very clearly that because we're talking about a council or a council contractor doing this contract, work, then they are happy to provide the monies for the buildings as well as the equipment, which is relatively unusual. Most of the leasing is just for equipment. And then also some suppliers have been offering the finance with their plant. So again, that's another option that can be looked at depending on which is cheapest and suits the contracts entered into. Now we come to looking at the annual costs of the two different systems. For the incinerator, again, we've had problems in finding out what would be the expected operational costs. So we've had to use other data from Fitchner, Naranjan Patel and others as to an estimate for that. So you can see the numbers there. Then the high recycling option, to be fair, we have to include the loss of PFI credits on the high recycling side. So that's 3.34 million a year added onto our costs. Although it's not real money, it's still a loss of income. The separate food waste collection potentially could be lower cost than that, but again, we haven't been able to find out what it is expected to be in Cornwall. We've used data from other local authorities. The plant operating costs and so on, we are fairly sure about for the high recycling option. And we find that, in fact, if you leave out the PFI credits, the total cost of operating the two plants is much of a muchness. And equally, the income works out a bit more for the high recycling than it does for the incinerator proposal. And that's because, although there's less electricity produced in the high recycling option, it's from anaerobic digestion, so it gets a higher price for each unit of electricity. And of course, we've got a lot more materials sales, so that increases income. So the net annual costs work out fairly similar in the two options, but the major difference comes in when you look at the cost of the money, so that's the financing and the profit, and obviously we have to factor in the PFI termination costs. And you can see the incinerator, we believe, will cost over 20 million a year in financing, and the high recycling option under 10 million. So the total annual cost difference is 9.5 million on improvements by doing for high recycling. In summary then, we have a lower annual cost of over £15 million a year on high recycling if you did a straight comparison. But we recognise that the world is not like that, so we also say that once you've taken into account the total cost of the loss of the PFI contract, you still save £9.5 million a year. There are capital costs of 46 to 66 million, and there's significant savings, as we've already seen, on capital repayments and interest. Other advantages are you save around 2.5 million tonnes of CO2 emissions over 25 years, which increases Cornwall's green credentials. It's hard to be green when you're stuffing everything up a chimney into the sky. This approach can be delivered using present planning policies, and there are different financing options feasible. You've seen several, and I'm sure there'll be others. The suppliers are bankable and the technology is deliverable. The sites are available, the technology is available, it's all deliverable. And it has the added advantage of no hazardous waste and increasing local business opportunities, which obviously strengthens the local economy, which is something the council is very keen on. So the Cornwall Waste Forum team is happy to share all our information with the council, and we encourage you to urgently commission an independent assessment of these high recycling options to determine in detail the savings of £9.5 million a year indicated here. We now encourage everybody that listens to this and sees the slides, please lobby your local councillors to encourage them to support the independent assessment. And please do that before the 30th of July, when we anticipate the decision will be made. Thank you.